Millionaire needed a translator urgently, until a street kid showed up and saved the deal. Richard Thompson was desperate as he held his head in his hands in the elegant 23rd floor office. His family business, built over 40 years, depended on that deal to survive the crisis hitting the American textile industry. The Japanese investor Hiroshi Tanaka gestured angrily, speaking rapidly in his native language, while the younger partner, Michael Harris, tried unsuccessfully to calm him down. The official translator had called the day before to say he couldn't attend due to urgent personal matters, and all other professionals in the city were busy or unavailable. "Mr. Tanaka, please understand our situation," Michael attempted to explain in basic English, but the Japanese man shook his head. Richard knew that without that $2 million investment, he'd have to lay off 300 employees by the end of the month. Many of them had worked at the company since he took over his father's business in the 80s. They were people he knew by name, whose families he'd watched grow. The tension in the air was palpable when the secretary, Mrs. Wilson, entered the room carrying a tray of coffee. Her eyes showed concern. She too knew what was at stake. "Mr. Thompson, there's a girl downstairs insisting on speaking with you. She says she can help with the translator problem," Mrs. Wilson said hesitantly. "We don't have time for games, Wilson," Richard replied without lifting his eyes from the documents. "But sir, she spoke a few words in Japanese to the doorman. She said she heard the shouting from up here and wants to help." Richard slowly raised his head. Any possibility, no matter how small, was worth trying. Michael, however, protested immediately. "Richard, you can't seriously be considering this. A street kid? That's insane. Let's find another translator in another city. Hire an online service. Anything but this." The businessman looked at the Japanese man, who was still speaking loudly and pointing at his wristwatch. It was clear his patience was running thin. "Bring her in, Wilson. We have nothing left to lose," Richard decided, ignoring his partner's disapproving look. A few minutes later, Mrs. Wilson returned with a girl who looked about 15. Her dark hair was tied back with a worn-out elastic, and her clothes, though clean, showed signs of heavy use. A small canvas backpack hung from her thin shoulders. "Good afternoon," she said with a small bow. "My name is Emily Parker." What caught everyone's attention was the girl's demeanor. Despite her simple clothes, she carried herself with a dignity that even impressed Michael, who had been ready to throw her out immediately. Richard studied the girl's face for a few seconds. There was something in her eyes, a mix of determination and vulnerability that touched him deeply. "Emily, do you really know Japanese?" he asked, trying to keep his tone gentle. "Yes, sir. I know Japanese, English, and a little Mandarin too. I learned by watching and listening to people," she answered without hesitation. Michael let out a sarcastic laugh. "Richard, this is ridiculous. How could a street kid know languages we don't even fully master?" Emily turned to the partner, and to everyone's surprise replied in fluent Japanese. The words flowed naturally from her mouth, with perfect pronunciation and intonation. "Watashi wa anata ga omotte iru yorimo oku no koto o shite imasu." I know more than you think. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Hiroshi Tanaka's heavy breathing, who had stopped gesturing and was now watching the girl with renewed attention. Slowly, he addressed her in Japanese, asking a question none of the Americans understood. Emily responded promptly, also in Japanese, and a brief conversation unfolded between them. Richard and Michael watched like spectators of a movie without subtitles, trying to interpret their facial expressions to grasp the direction of the conversation. Finally, Hiroshi turned to Richard and said a few words to Emily, who immediately translated, "Mr. Tanaka says my Japanese is very good, but he wants to know if I can be trusted to translate important business documents. He also asked where I learned to speak like this." Richard felt a mix of relief and curiosity. The girl truly mastered the language, but there were still many unanswered questions. "Where did you learn Japanese, Emily?" he asked. The girl lowered her eyes for a moment, as if reliving painful memories. "My mother was a language teacher at a private school here in New York City. She spoke 5 languages. and always said knowledge was the only thing no one could take from me. When I was little, she taught me everything she knew. And your mother, where is she now? Richard asked, though he suspected the answer from the girl's melancholic tone. She passed away 3 years ago. After that, I lost our home and ended up on the streets. But I kept practicing the languages by talking to tourists downtown and listening to radio programs in different languages at the public library whenever I could get in. Michael, who had remained skeptical, now looked slightly embarrassed. Hiroshi said something else in Japanese, and Emily translated, "He wants to know if I can start translating the documents now. He says he's impressed with my pronunciation and that he's wasted enough time today." Richard glanced at Michael, who merely shrugged, clearly still reluctant, but with no viable alternatives. "All right, Emily, let's give it a try. But you understand these are very important documents, right? Hundreds of jobs depend on this negotiation," Richard explained, keeping his tone serious but not intimidating. "I understand, Mr. Thompson. I'll do my best," she replied, straightening her shoulders. Mrs. Wilson brought a chair for Emily to sit at the meeting table. The girl pulled a worn-out notebook and a pen from her backpack, preparing to work. Hiroshi began speaking, and Emily translated simultaneously. "Mr. Tanaka says his company in Japan is interested in investing in the American textile industry, specifically in your factory, Mr. Thompson. They see potential in the Latin American market and want to establish a long-term partnership." Richard nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. "Tell him we're very interested in this partnership. Our company has a 40-year tradition in the market and an experienced, dedicated team." Emily translated fluently, and Hiroshi responded with a more technical question about production capacity and delivery timelines. The conversation flowed naturally, with the girl demonstrating not only mastery of the language, but also an understanding of business terms. During a pause while Hiroshi examined some charts, Richard studied Emily more closely. There was something in the way she focused, how she noted down key points, that reminded him of someone. It was a dedication that went beyond simply needing to earn money. "Emily, may I ask, what do you hope to gain by helping us today?" he questioned, genuinely curious. The girl lifted her eyes from the notebook and looked at him directly. "Honestly, Mr. Thompson, I just want to feel useful again. It's been a long time since I've been able to use what my mother taught me to help people. It makes me feel close to her." The girl's words touched Richard deeply. He himself had lost his father 5 years ago and knew how hard it was to cope with the absence of someone so important. Michael, who had remained silent, cleared his throat discreetly. "Richard, not to interrupt, but we need to speed things up. Hiroshi has a flight back to Japan tonight." Hiroshi resumed the conversation, now going into detail about the investment amounts and contractual terms. Emily translated with impressive precision, capturing not just the content but also the tone and nuances of the speech. It was during the explanation of a specific clause about technology transfer that Emily hesitated for the first time. She heard Hiroshi explain the terms in Japanese, but before translating she asked for clarification. The two spoke briefly in Japanese, and then Emily turned to Richard with a concerned expression. "Mr. Thompson, I need to clarify something. Mr. Tanaka mentioned that part of the deal includes a complete modernization of the production line, which is excellent. However, he also said this would result in cutting at least 40% of the current workforce." Richard felt his stomach tighten. It was exactly the kind of news he'd feared but needed to hear. "Did he say anything else about it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily spoke again with Hiroshi and translated, "He said it's a normal part of industrial modernization and that the laid-off employees would receive compensation according to American law. He also mentioned that his company has made similar investments in other Latin American countries." Michael leaned forward, showing interest. "Richard, even with the job cuts, it's still better than shutting down the company entirely. At least we keep some jobs and ensure the business survives." Richard knew Michael was right from a purely commercial standpoint, but the thought of laying off people who had worked with him for decades deeply troubled him. Many of those employees were like family to him. Hiroshi said something else, and Emily translated, He wants to know if you have an alternative proposal that could preserve more jobs without compromising production efficiency. It was then that Richard realized Emily had asked the question on her own, not at Hiroshi's request. The girl had noticed his concern and was trying to help him find a solution that would save more jobs. "Emily, did you ask that on your own?" he questioned. "Yes, sir. I saw you were worried about the jobs, and I thought maybe there could be an alternative that works for both sides." Michael seemed annoyed by the girl's interference in the business matters, but Richard was impressed by her sensitivity and intelligence. "What do you think we could propose?" he asked, genuinely interested in her opinion. Emily thought for a few seconds before answering. "Well, I don't know much about business, but what if you proposed a longer modernization timeline? Instead of replacing all the machines at once, you could do it gradually, retraining employees to operate the new equipment. That would keep more jobs and still give Mr. Tanaka the results he expects." The suggestion was surprisingly sensible. Richard looked at Michael, who seemed to consider the idea, though still skeptical. "It's an interesting possibility, but we'd need to know if Hiroshi would accept a slower return on investment," Michael mused. Richard asked Emily to present the proposal to the Japanese investor. The girl carefully explained the idea in Japanese, using technical terms that impressed everyone with their precision. Hiroshi listened attentively and asked several questions, which Emily translated and answered competently. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes, with both sides exploring the possibilities and implications of the alternative proposal. Finally, Hiroshi smiled for the first time since arriving at the office and said something that made Emily smile too. "Mr. Tanaka says he's impressed by the creativity of the proposal and is willing to consider a more flexible timeline. He mentioned that he rarely meets business owners who care so much about their employees and that it shows the kind of partner he likes to work with." Richard felt an enormous sense of relief, not just because the proposal was accepted, but because it validated his values as a businessman. "Does he have any other conditions or demands?" Richard asked. Emily translated the question and listened to Hiroshi's response. "He says he'd like to visit the factory and meet the employees before finalizing the details. He also wants to better understand how you plan to implement the retraining program." "That can easily be arranged," Richard replied enthusiastically. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story." It was at that moment that Mrs. Wilson entered the room again, this time with a worried expression. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are some factory workers waiting downstairs. They found out about today's meeting and are worried about their jobs. They want to know if they'll be laid off." Richard sighed. The news had leaked, probably through someone in the office. It was natural for people to be anxious, but it complicated the situation. "Are they agitated?" he asked. "No, sir, just concerned. Frank, the production supervisor, is with them. He said they came peacefully. They just want an answer about the company's future." Hiroshi asked Emily something, and she translated. "He wants to know if these are the employees we were discussing. He'd like to meet them if possible." Michael immediately protested. "Richard, this isn't a good idea. We can't mix high-level negotiations with labor issues. It could complicate everything." But Richard had made up his mind. If Hiroshi wanted to meet the employees, this could be an opportunity to show the true value of his team. "Mrs. Wilson, ask Frank to come up with 2 or 3 worker representatives. We'll introduce them to Mr. Tanaka." Emily translated the decision to Hiroshi, who nodded approvingly. Michael shook his head, clearly disagreeing, but stayed silent. A few minutes later, 3 men entered the room. Frank Miller, the 58-year-old production supervisor, led the group. Beside him were Robert Wilson, a 45-year-old experienced welder, and David Cooper, a 52-year-old maintenance technician. The 3 men seemed uncomfortable in the lavish office setting, but maintained a respectful posture. Frank was the first to speak. "Mr. Thompson, sorry to bother you, but the crew downstairs is worried. Rumors started spreading that the factory might close or that there'll be mass layoffs." Richard looked at the men he'd watched grow professionally in the company. Frank had been with him since he took over his father's business. Robert had started as an apprentice and become one of the best welders in the area. David knew every machine in the factory as if they were extensions of his own hands. "Frank, I'd like to introduce you all to Mr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a Japanese investor interested in partnering with our company," said Richard, gesturing toward the Japanese man. Emily translated the introduction, and Hiroshi stood to greet the three men. His respectful demeanor impressed the employees, who hadn't expected such courtesy from a foreign investor. "Mr. Tanaka would like to know about your work at the factory," Emily translated. "He's interested in understanding how our operations function." Frank turned to Richard. "Mr. Thompson, can we speak openly? The team needs to know if their jobs are secure." "You can speak freely, Frank. Mr. Tanaka values honesty." Hiroshi asked a question in Japanese and Emily translated. "He wants to know how long you've worked for the company and what you think about the quality of the products we manufacture." Frank answered first. "I've been here 22 years. I started as a machine operator and now oversee the entire production. I can proudly say our products meet international standards. We've never delivered anything less than perfect." Robert added, "I've been here 18 years. Everything I know I learned here. Our team is tight-knit, we help each other out. If a machine breaks down, no matter the hour, we stay until it's fixed." David chimed in, 15 years for me. I know every bolt in this factory. The machines may be older, but we keep them running like new. And we're always willing to learn new things." Emily faithfully translated their responses, and Richard noticed Hiroshi listening with growing interest. The investor asked several questions about production processes, quality control, and employee relationships. What began as a formal presentation turned into a genuine conversation about work, dedication, and professional pride. Hiroshi grew particularly intrigued when David explained how they had developed creative solutions to keep older equipment running at peak efficiency. Throughout the discussion, Emily didn't just translate, she also provided cultural context to help Hiroshi better understand their answers. Her sensitivity in recognizing when something needed further clarification impressed everyone. Then Hiroshi asked an unexpected question. "Mr. Tanaka wants to know if you'd be willing to teach your techniques to other employees in Latin America should this partnership go through," Emily translated. The three men exchanged surprised glances. Frank replied, "Of course, it'd be an honor to share our knowledge. We've always believed our experience could help others." Hiroshi smiled and said something longer to Emily, who translated enthusiastically, "Mr. Tanaka is very impressed with the team's quality. He says he's starting to understand why Mr. Thompson's company has such a strong reputation in the market. He'd like to know if it would be possible to organize a program where experienced employees like you could train teams at other factories in the region." Richard sensed the conversation was taking an even better turn than he'd hoped. The proposal to turn his employees into specialized instructors wouldn't just preserve jobs, it would also honor their expertise. "Frank, what do you think of this possibility?" Richard asked. "It'd be amazing, Mr. Thompson. We've got so much accumulated knowledge that could help others. And it'd be a way for us to keep growing professionally," Frank replied, visibly excited. Michael, who had remained silent for most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "Richard, this is straying from the original scope of negotiations. We can't complicate the deal with programs we don't even know are feasible." Hiroshi said something to Emily, who translated with a slightly more serious tone. "Mr. Tanaka said he prefers to complicate things a bit now to ensure he's making the right investment. He believes a company is made of people, not just machines." Hiroshi's response clearly pleased the employees and Richard, but it bothered Michael, who seemed increasingly impatient with the direction of the conversation. Frank asked a direct question. "Mr. Thompson, can you honestly tell us, will we keep our jobs?" Richard looked at Hiroshi, who nodded, indicating he could answer. "Frank, if everything goes as we hope, not only will you keep your jobs, but you'll have growth opportunities you never imagined. Mr. Tanaka is proposing that you become training specialists for the entire region." The three men smiled for the first time since entering the room. Robert even got visibly emotional, discreetly wiping his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, you have no idea how much relief this brings us. My wife was losing sleep from worry," said Robert. David added, "And our children." Will they be able to keep studying? That's what matters most to us. Hiroshi asked another question, and Emily translated, "He wants to know if you have children in school and what their dreams are for the future." The question touched the men's hearts. Frank answered, "My daughter is studying business administration. She dreams of working for a big company, maybe even abroad someday." Robert said, "My oldest son is finishing high school and wants to study engineering. The younger one is still in school, but he's very smart." David added, "My daughter wants to be a language teacher. She's always been good at English in school and dreams of traveling the world teaching." When Emily translated the last answer, something shifted in her expression. She fell silent for a few seconds, clearly moved by the coincidence. "Emily?" Richard asked, noticing her reaction. "Sorry, it's just... My mother was also a language teacher. She had the same dream as your daughter, David," she explained, her voice slightly trembling. David looked at the young woman with renewed interest. "Your mother was a teacher, and do you plan to follow in her footsteps?" Emily hesitated before answering, I'd love to study and become a teacher too, but my current situation doesn't allow for long-term plans." That's when Richard saw an opportunity to do something that could change everyone's lives. "Mr. Tanaka," he said, addressing the Japanese man, "I'd like to make an additional proposal to our agreement." Emily translated, and Hiroshi indicated he was listening. "What if we included an educational initiative in our training program? We could create scholarships for employees' children and talented young people in the local community like Emily here." The suggestion surprised everyone in the room. Michael seemed shocked, the employees grew hopeful, and Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. Hiroshi asked several questions about the proposal's feasibility, costs, and expected social impact. Richard answered enthusiastically, seeing he was building something far greater than a simple business partnership. "Emily, could you translate for Mr. Tanaka that I believe investing in education is investing in the future? A truly successful company is one that improves the lives of the people around it," said Richard. When Emily finished translating, Hiroshi spoke for nearly 5 minutes in Japanese. Everyone waited anxiously for the translation. Mr. Tanaka said he was deeply impressed by everything he saw and heard today. He said when he came to the United States, he expected to find just a business opportunity, but discovered something far more valuable. "A company with a soul," translated Emily, tears in her eyes. Hiroshi continued speaking, and Emily went on. "He said he accepts all the proposals, the flexible modernization schedule, the regional training program, and the educational initiative. More than that, he wants to increase the initial investment to $2.5 million to make all these projects possible." The silence that followed was broken by the applause of Frank, Robert, and David. Mrs. Wilson, who had remained by the door observing the conversation, also clapped, moved. Richard stood up and extended his hand to Hiroshi, who shook it warmly. The two men looked each other in the eye, and without words, understood they had built something special. "Emily," said Richard, "without you, none of this would have been possible. How can I show my gratitude?" The girl wiped the tears streaming down her face and replied, "Mr. Thompson, being able to use what my mother taught me to help all these people is already the greatest reward I could ask for." It was then that Hiroshi said something directly to Emily, without asking for translation. "Mr. Tanaka said he'd like to offer me a full scholarship, including language courses in Japan if I'm interested," she translated, her voice trembling with emotion. Richard felt his heart swell with joy. He was witnessing the moment a brave girl's dreams were coming true. "And are you interested?" he asked. I don't know what to say. It's more than I ever dreamed of," replied Emily, barely able to speak. David approached the girl and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Young lady, your mother would be so proud of you today. Take this opportunity. It's what she'd want for you." The technician's words deeply touched Emily, who finally managed to smile through her tears. "I accept, and I promise I'll come back to help other kids like me achieve their dreams too." Michael, who had remained silent for the past few minutes, finally spoke up. "Richard, I need to talk to you privately. Now." The urgent and slightly irritated tone in Michael's voice caught everyone's attention. Richard realized his partner wasn't happy with how the negotiation was unfolding. "Of course, Michael. Mr. Tanaka, we need a few minutes to sort out some internal details," said Richard. Hiroshi nodded understandingly, and Emily translated that he'd use the time to make some calls to Japan. Richard and Michael stepped into the next room, leaving the staff chatting excitedly with Emily about the news. As soon as the door closed, Michael exploded. "Richard, have you completely lost your mind? We had a simple business deal and you turned it into a massive charity project." "Michael, what's wrong with doing the right thing?" replied Richard, keeping his calm. "The right thing? Richard, we're businessmen, not a charity organization. You've committed resources we're not even sure we'll have, set up impossible expectations, and on top of that, you want to fund some street kids' education." Richard studied his partner's face. There was something more behind this overreaction. "Michael, since when do you oppose investing in people? You were the one who suggested the employee training program last year." "That was different. It was a direct investment in the company's productivity. Now you're talking about scholarships, social programs. This will eat up resources that should go to the shareholders." Richard began to suspect there was something Michael wasn't saying. "Michael, do you have a specific problem with Emily? Because it seems to me your resistance goes beyond financial concerns." The partner hesitated for a few seconds before responding. "Richard, you don't know this girl. How can you trust her with sensitive company information? How do you know she won't use what she heard today against us in the future?" "Against us? Michael, she literally saved our deal. Without her, the company would have gone bankrupt in a matter of weeks." "Or maybe she showed up here for other reasons. Have you thought about that? A street kid who speaks fluent Japanese, appearing exactly on the day we needed a translator. Doesn't that seem like too much of a coincidence to you?" Richard was surprised by Michael's suggestion. His partner's paranoia was starting to bother him. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm saying we should look into who this girl really is before including her in our plans, and definitely before giving her access to confidential company information." Richard shook his head, frustrated. "Michael, you're being unfair. That girl showed more integrity in 2 hours than many professionals we've known have shown in years of work." "Richard, you're being naive. Desperate people will do anything for money, and a street kid is always desperate." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Wilson entered with a worried expression. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation outside. The girl Emily," she fainted. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard rushed back to the meeting room, followed by Michael. He found Emily sitting in a chair with Frank holding a glass of water for her to drink. Her face was pale, and she was trembling slightly. "What happened?" Richard asked, concerned. "She was talking to us when she started feeling dizzy. Said she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning," Frank explained. Richard felt a pang of guilt. He'd been so caught up in the negotiation that he hadn't thought about the girl's basic needs. "Mrs. Wilson, please ask someone to bring something from the building's cafe. Sandwiches, juice, anything," Richard requested. Hiroshi, who had noticed the situation, said something in Japanese. Emily, still weak, translated, "He's asking if I'm okay and if I need a doctor." "No, thank you, it's just hunger. Sometimes I go days without eating properly," Emily replied, trying to downplay the situation. The girl's response touched Richard deeply. Here was a young woman who, even while starving, had dedicated hours of her time to help strangers without asking for anything in return. Michael, however, saw it differently. "See, Richard, she's clearly in a desperate situation. People like that will do anything." Richard looked at him disapprovingly. "Michael, how can you be so heartless? The girl is starving and you blame her for it?" Emily raised her head and looked at Michael. "Sir, if you're worried about my honesty, I understand. I know my appearance doesn't inspire trust in people like you, but I want you to know I've never taken anything that wasn't mine, even when I was starving." The dignity with which Emily defended herself impressed everyone in the room, except Michael, who remained skeptical. "It's easy to say that when you're trying to get something," he retorted. That's when Frank stepped in. "With all due respect, Mr. Harris, but this girl has more character than a lot of folks walking around in suits and ties. She could have translated anything to benefit herself, but she was honest the whole time." Robert added, "It's true. And when the Japanese gentleman offered the scholarship, she didn't even ask for money or other advantages. She just thanked him." David finished, "My daughter is her age. If one day she needs help, I hope she finds people like your Richard, not like, well, people who judge by appearances." David's comment was a direct hit at Michael, who visibly stiffened. Richard noticed the situation was becoming too tense. "Everyone, let's focus on what's important," Richard intervened. "Emily, how are you feeling?" "Better, thank you. I'm sorry for causing this trouble," she replied. "You didn't cause any trouble. In fact, you solved the biggest problem we had," Richard said, giving Michael a pointed look. "Mrs. Wilson returned with a tray of sandwiches and juice. Emily ate politely, but Richard could tell she was truly hungry by how she tried to control her pace to avoid seeming desperate. Hiroshi watched the scene carefully and asked Emily a question. "He wants to know where I live and what my life has been like on the streets," she translated between sips of juice. Richard encouraged her. "You can tell him, Emily. I think it's important for him to understand your story." The girl hesitated for a few seconds, but then began speaking in Japanese, telling her story directly to Hiroshi. Richard watched the Japanese investor's expressions shift as she spoke. When Emily finished, Hiroshi remained silent for a moment, clearly moved. Then he addressed Richard in basic English. "Mr. Thompson, this girl, very strong spirit, very good heart. In Japan, we value people like this." Richard understood enough to know Hiroshi was impressed by Emily's strength of character. "Emily, can you tell us what you said to him?" Richard asked. "I talked about my mother, about how she got sick and we lost everything. I told him about my first months on the street, how hard it was to learn to survive. I also mentioned the kind people I met along the way, who helped me without asking for anything in return." "And what else?" Richard prompted. "I said I never lost hope that one day I could use what I've learned to help others, that my mother always said knowledge is like a seed. It only grows when shared." Emily's words deeply touched everyone present. Even Michael seemed slightly moved, though he tried to maintain his critical stance. Hiroshi said something else in Japanese, and Emily translated. "He says he wants to add one more condition to the deal, that I be hired as the educational program coordinator as soon as I'm qualified." Richard smiled broadly. "That would be perfect. What do you say, Emily? Do you accept this challenge?" I'd love to. But first I need to study hard to live up to that responsibility," she replied humbly. "And you will. You'll have all the support you need," Richard assured her. Michael cleared his throat, drawing attention. "Richard, we need to settle the contractual details. We can't keep making promises without knowing how we'll fulfill them." "You're right, Michael. Let's get to the practical aspects," Richard agreed. Over the next 2 hours, the details of the agreement were finalized. Hiroshi showed impressive patience, clarifying each point through Emily, who continued translating with remarkable precision. The final agreement included a $2.5 million investment in modernizing the factory, a 2-year implementation timeline to preserve jobs, a regional training program coordinated by experienced employees, an educational initiative with scholarships for local youth, a full scholarship for Emily, including a study period in Japan, a guaranteed job for Emily as educational coordinator after her qualification. Once all terms were settled, Hiroshi asked to speak privately with Richard. Emily translated the request and Richard agreed. The two men spoke through Emily for about 15 minutes. Richard was intrigued when he noticed that Hiroshi was asking specific questions about him, his business philosophy, and how he treated his employees. Finally, Hiroshi smiled and said something that made Emily emotional again. "Mr. Tanaka said he rarely meets businessmen like you. He mentioned that in Japan, there's a concept called ikigai, which means life's purpose. He believes you found your ikigai, conducting business in a way that benefits everyone involved." Richard was honored by the comment. "Tell him I learned that from my father. He always said a company is only truly successful when everyone around it thrives too." When Emily translated the response, Hiroshi nodded approvingly and said something else. He says that's why he's decided to increase his investment further. He wants to offer $3 million and propose that you become partners in expanding to other countries in Latin America. Richard was stunned. What had started as a negotiation to save the company had turned into an opportunity for international expansion. Emily, are you sure you translated that correctly? He asked, incredulous. Yes, sir. He said companies with strong values are rare anywhere in the world, and he wants to be part of growing one of them. Michael, who had remained silent during the last part of the negotiation, finally spoke up. Richard, this is beyond anything we imagined. Do we even have the capacity to manage an international expansion? It was a valid question, but Richard felt he was facing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Michael, we have an experienced team, we'll soon have enough resources, and most importantly, we have a partner who understands our values. I think we can make this work. Hiroshi said something to Emily, who translated, He says he doesn't expect an answer today about the international expansion. He wants you to think it over carefully and discuss it among yourselves. The priority now is finalizing the main agreement and starting implementation here. Richard breathed a sigh of relief. Hiroshi's wisdom in not pushing for an immediate decision showed the kind of partner he was. Tell him we appreciate his trust and will definitely consider the proposal seriously. The documents were prepared for signing. Emily continued assisting with translating the final terms, ensuring there were no misunderstandings. When it came time to sign, Hiroshi insisted that Emily witness the moment. He said he wanted her to know she had been a key part of the negotiation's success. Richard signed first, followed by Hiroshi. Michael signed as a witness, though he still seemed slightly uneasy about the whole process. After the signatures, Hiroshi stood and gave a small bow to Richard, who returned the gesture respectfully. Then the Japanese man turned to Emily and said something in his native language. He said he's honored to have met me, and that my courage and intelligence inspired him. He also said he hopes I embrace every opportunity life offers me from now on. Emily translated, clearly moved. And I hope we can meet again when you're studying in Japan, Richard added. It would be an honor, Mr. Thompson, and I hope to repay all the trust you've placed in me. Frank, Robert, and David, who had stayed in the room throughout the process, stepped forward to congratulate Richard and thank him for securing their jobs and the new opportunities. Mr. Thompson, you have no idea what this means for our families, Frank said, visibly emotional. Frank, you all deserve this and much more. Without your dedication all these years, I wouldn't have a company to offer as a partnership. Mrs. Wilson entered the room carrying a bottle of champagne and glasses. I thought we could celebrate this historic moment for the company. Richard accepted the suggestion and poured champagne for everyone. For Emily, Mrs. Wilson had brought a special juice. I'd like to make a toast, said Richard, raising his glass, to the courage of an extraordinary young woman who appeared when we needed her most, to the dedication of employees who are more than colleagues, their family, and to the opportunity to build something greater than just a company, a community that thrives together. Everyone raised their glasses, moved. Hiroshi said something in Japanese and Emily translated, He toasts to the proof that successful businesses are made with the heart, not just the mind. The celebration was interrupted by a call on Hiroshi's cell phone. He answered and spoke briefly in Japanese, his expression worried. When he hung up, he explained the situation to Emily, who translated, His flight was cancelled due to bad weather. He'll have to spend the night in New York City and won't be able to leave until tomorrow morning. Richard immediately offered, Mr. Tanaka, it would be an honor if you'd join us for dinner tonight. I'd love to introduce you to my family and show you more of the city. Hiroshi graciously accepted the invitation and suggested that Emily join them, as she would be essential for communication during dinner. Emily, would you like to come? Asked Richard. The girl hesitated. I'd love to, but I don't have clothes suitable for a formal dinner. Mrs. Wilson quickly offered, My daughter is about your age and size. I'm sure she'd be happy to lend you something appropriate. Richard smiled. Perfect. Mrs. Wilson, could you take Emily to your house and help her get ready? Let's plan dinner for 8 o'clock at Mr. Tanaka's hotel restaurant. As preparations for dinner were made, Michael asked to speak privately with Richard again. Richard, are you sure you're making the right decisions? In just a few hours, you've completely transformed our business life. Michael, sometimes the best decisions are the ones we make with our heart, and my heart tells me we're on the right path. And if we're wrong, what if this girl isn't who she seems? What if Hiroshi changes his mind? Michael pressed. And if we're right, what if this is the opportunity we've been waiting for all these years? Michael, we can't let fear stop us from growing. Michael sighed. I hope you know what you're doing, Richard. I hope so too, Michael, but I'd rather take risks trying to do the right thing than be certain I'm doing the wrong thing. At 8 o'clock that evening, Richard arrived at the elegant hotel restaurant with his wife, Catherine, and their teenage daughter, Ashley. Hiroshi was already waiting, accompanied by Emily, who looked unrecognizable. Mrs. Wilson had done an excellent job. Emily wore a simple yet elegant dress, her hair styled in a sophisticated updo, and she carried a small borrowed purse. More than her physical transformation, what stood out most was her confident and graceful demeanor. Emily, you look beautiful, exclaimed Ashley, Richard's daughter. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson and her daughter were very kind to me, Emily replied, blushing. Catherine warmly embraced Emily. Richard has told me all about you. I'm so happy to meet you. During dinner, Emily translated the conversations between Hiroshi and the Thompson family. The Japanese investor was charmed by American hospitality and asked many questions about the local culture. Ashley, who studied English at school, tried to speak directly to Hiroshi in basic English, which amused him greatly. Emily helped with translations when needed, always with patience and good humor. It was during dessert that Catherine asked a question that changed the course of the conversation. Emily, Richard told me you lost your mother a few years ago. How has it been living alone? The question touched on a sensitive point, but Emily answered honestly, It was very difficult at first, Mrs. Catherine. I didn't know how to get food, where to sleep, how to keep myself safe. But I learned there are good people everywhere, willing to help when you really need it. And you never thought about looking for shelters or assistance programs? Asked Ashley, genuinely curious. I tried a few, but they were always full or had rules I couldn't follow. I ended up figuring out I could manage better on my own, talking to people on the street, offering small services like translation for tourists. Hiroshi asked a question in Japanese and Emily answered him directly. The conversation continued for a few minutes, with Richard and his family watching their facial expressions to try to understand the topic. Finally, Emily turned to the group. Mr. Tanaka was asking about my plans for the future, specifically how I intend to use the education I'll receive to help others in my situation. And what did you say? Asked Richard. I said I want to create a language learning center specifically for homeless youth. A place where they can not only learn languages, but also get guidance on how to use that knowledge to improve their lives. Catherine was visibly moved by the answer. What a wonderful idea, Emily, and very brave. It's not bravery, Mrs. Catherine, it's gratitude. So many people have helped me over the years that I feel I need to give back somehow. Ashley asked, But aren't you afraid of failing? It's such a big project for someone so young. Emily smiled. My mother always said the only real failure is not trying. Even if I don't achieve everything I dream of, at least I'll have tried to make a difference. The girl's wisdom constantly impressed the adults present. Richard realized he was in the presence of someone very special, someone who had turned suffering into strength and adversity into compassion. Hiroshi said something else in Japanese and Emily translated. He said that in Japan there's a proverb, adversity is the first path to truth. He believes I understood that very young. That's a very wise proverb, commented Catherine, and you truly demonstrate impressive maturity for your age. The dinner lasted until almost midnight, with conversations about culture, business, dreams, and plans for the future. When it was time to say goodbye, Hiroshi made sure to personally bid farewell to each member of the Thompson family. Emily, said Richard, where will you spend the night? We don't want you going back to the streets. Oh, don't worry, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Wilson already offered me her place for tonight. Tomorrow I'll start organizing my paperwork for the scholarship. Actually, Catherine interjected, I'd like to make a proposal. How would you like to stay at our house until everything is arranged for your studies? We have a guest room, and Ashley would love having an older sister for a while. The offer surprised Emily, who was speechless for a few seconds. I don't want to impose on your family," she replied, visibly emotional. "Emily," said Ashley, "you wouldn't be imposing. It would be amazing to have someone who could help me with languages and tell me stories about the world." Richard supported his wife's suggestion. "It's an excellent idea, Catherine. Emily, you'd be very welcome in our home. I accept with all my heart." "Thank you for everything," replied Emily, tears in her eyes. Hiroshi watched the scene with satisfaction and said something in Japanese that made Emily smile through her tears. He said he's now certain he made the right choice investing here. He said a society where people care for one another is a prosperous one. The next morning, Richard accompanied Hiroshi to the airport. Emily also went along to assist with final conversations before his departure. On the way, Hiroshi made a surprising revelation. "Mr. Thompson," he said through Emily, "I need to tell you something. When I arrived in the United States, I had doubts about this investment. Your company had good numbers, but I wanted to know the character of the people involved." "And what changed your mind?" asked Richard, curious. "It was seeing how you treated Emily. In just a few hours, I could tell you value people over profit. That's rare in the business world." Richard was moved by the revelation. "Mr. Tanaka, we're the ones who learned so much from Emily. She showed us the true value of perseverance and generosity." At the airport, during their farewell, Hiroshi handed Emily a card. He said, "This is his assistant's contact in Japan. She'll help arrange all the details for my trip when I'm ready," Emily translated. "And when do you think you'll be ready?" asked Richard. "I'd like to take a few months to prepare. Maybe take an intensive formal Japanese course to build on what I already know. I want to be worthy of the opportunity you're giving me." Hiroshi nodded approvingly when Emily translated her response. He said something else which she translated. He said, "Patience to prepare properly is a sign of wisdom. He'll be waiting for me whenever I feel ready." After Hiroshi's departure, Richard and Emily returned to the office. There was much work to be done to begin implementing the agreement. The first week was intense. Emily accompanied Richard in meetings with employees, suppliers, and consultants. Her presence proved invaluable not just for translation, but also for her unique perspective on how the changes would affect those involved. During a meeting with factory workers, Frank asked an important question. "Mr. Thompson, how do we explain to families that these changes are positive? Many people are still worried." Emily asked for permission to speak. "May I suggest something? What if we organize smaller meetings by department where people can ask questions and get specific answers about how the changes will affect their work?" The suggestion was accepted, and Emily helped arrange a series of informational sessions. Her ability to communicate with people of different ages and backgrounds proved extremely valuable. It was during one of these meetings that something unexpected happened. A longtime employee, Mrs. Jenkins, who had worked in cleaning for 15 years, approached Emily. "Sweetheart, you remind me of someone. What did you say your mother's name was?" "Mary Louise Parker. Why do you ask?" Mrs. Jenkins turned pale. "Mary Louise Parker. A language teacher. Didn't she work at St. Anthony's School some years ago?" "Yes." "Did you know my mother?" asked Emily, surprised. "I did, sweetheart. She gave private lessons to my daughter, a wonderful woman, very dedicated. When she stopped coming, my daughter was heartbroken." Emily's heart raced. It had been years since she met someone who had known her mother. "Did she ever mention having a daughter?" Emily asked hesitantly. "Of course she did. She spoke of you with such pride. Said you were a very smart girl, that you picked up languages like it was nothing. She always said you'd be someone special in the world." Tears began to stream down Emily's face. It was as if part of her mother had come back to life through Mrs. Jenkins's memories. Did she ever talk about her final days? About how she was feeling?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Jenkins held the young woman's hands. "Sweetheart, your mother was worried about you, yes, but she always said you were strong and would find your way. She had so much faith in you. I just wish she could see where I am today. I wish she knew I never gave up on the dream she planted in me. I'm sure she knows, dear. Mothers always do." The conversation with Mrs. Jenkins left a deep mark on Emily. That night, she talked at length with Catherine about her memories of her mother and how hard it was to carry the weight of her expectations. "Emily," Catherine said, "your mother would be proud not just of what you've achieved, but of who you've become. You've turned your pain into strength to help others." "Sometimes I'm afraid I won't live up to what everyone expects of me," Emily confessed. "You know what? That fear is normal, even healthy. It shows you take your responsibilities seriously. But remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be true to yourself." Catherine's words helped Emily find peace with her insecurities and focus on the present instead of worrying too much about the future. In the months that followed, the transformation at Richard's company was remarkable. The modernization schedule began as planned, with experienced employees leading training on the new equipment. Emily divided her time between preparing for her studies in Japan and helping implement the company's social programs. She created a basic English course for employees' children and started developing a language learning center for underprivileged youth. During this time, Michael gradually changed his opinion of Emily. Seeing her dedication and the positive results she brought, he began to recognize the value of her contributions. "Richard," he said one day, "I have to admit I was wrong about the girl. She really is exceptional." "What changed your mind?" Richard asked, curious. "Yesterday I saw her teaching English to a group of kids. Her patience, the way she breaks down difficult concepts so simply. She has a natural gift for teaching." "And you still think she just showed up here by accident?" Richard asked with a smile. "No, Richard. Now I believe she came because she was exactly what we needed, even if we didn't know it." This shift in Michael's perspective was important for the workplace atmosphere and helped solidify Emily's position in the company. By December, 6 months after their first meeting, Hiroshi returned to the United States to check on the project's progress. He was impressed by the advancements in every area: productivity, employee morale, and the social impact of the programs. "Emily," he said through translation, "are you ready to begin your studies in Japan?" "I'm excited, Mr. Tanaka. I've spent the last few months studying formal Japanese and Japanese culture. I feel ready now to make the most of this opportunity." "And your projects here? Aren't you worried about leaving them?" "Actually, after speaking with Mr. Richard and Mrs. Catherine, we decided I can continue coordinating the development of the projects remotely. Technology allows me to stay in regular contact and make important decisions even from afar." Hiroshi approved the plan and mentioned there were special arrangements so Emily could make regular trips back to the United States during her studies, keeping her connected to the project she had started. On the eve of Emily's trip to Japan, Richard organized a farewell party at the company. All the employees attended, as well as the Thompson family and some business partners. During the party, Emily gave an emotional speech. "8 months ago, I was a girl with no prospects, living day to day on the streets of New York City. Today, I'm about to embark on an adventure that will change my life forever. This was only possible because I found people who believed in me when I had lost hope myself." She looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Richard, you didn't just save my life. You taught me that business can be done with heart, that true success is the kind that benefits everyone around you." She turned to Catherine and Ashley. "Mrs. Catherine, Ashley, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, a family. You showed me that love doesn't depend on blood but on choice." Finally, she looked at all the employees. "And you taught me that a company is so much more than machines and profits. It's a community where every person matters, where every dream has value." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Emily finished her speech. Frank stepped forward. "Young lady, you've revolutionized our company and our lives. Go study, learn all you can, but never forget you'll always have a home here." The next morning at the airport, the farewell was emotional but full of hope. Emily wasn't leaving with sadness, but with gratitude and determination. "Richard," she said, "I promise I'll come back ready to turn our dreams into reality." "Emily, you've already turned so many dreams into reality. Now it's time to fulfill your own." As he watched Emily's plane disappear into the horizon, Richard reflected on how his life had changed since that desperate day when she walked into his office. A street girl had saved his company, transformed his vision of business, and shown that the greatest wealth is built when we invest in people. 2 years later, Emily returned to the United States fluent in Japanese and Mandarin, with specializations in intercultural education and social project management. She took over as coordinator of the Language Learning Center, which had already become a national model for underprivileged youth education. Richard's company had expanded to 3 Latin American countries, always upholding the values of social responsibility that had defined his original partnership with Hiroshi. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story. Do you believe Emily made the right decisions? How would you have acted in Richard's place upon meeting such a determined young woman? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts and where you're watching from. If this story moved you as much as it moved us to tell it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories like this one.